Dorsey Jackson Global.
It has begun. The events described in this story occurred at different times for different members of the same family. I met this family and convinced them to tell me their story. This strange incident happened with 4 members of this family. Hello, my name is Harrison, and I am conducting research on paranormal incidents. I want to become a paranormal investigator in the future, and I am currently preparing for that. I take notes on paranormal activity that occurs around me, and I discuss strange occurrences with people in the hopes that this will help me become a paranormal investigator in the future. So I met a family today who informed me about a paranormal event that happened to them recently, and I decided to start a record of these occurrences. Let's figure out what happened to them. Mr. Williams lives in this house with his wife and 2 children. Their older son, Colton, is 15 years old, and their younger son, Nicole, is 12 years old. Nicole, the house's youngest and brightest member, describes what happened to him as follows. We bought this house 6 years ago, and after a few months, strange things began to happen in this house. As a result, household items began to deteriorate. First, the TV was damaged, then the fridge, and finally, the air conditioner. As a result, other things in the house started to fail. Everyone was surprised to know why all of these things were happening in the house. Then I went to bed in my room one night. I dozed for a while. Right at that moment, I became aware of the sound of someone strolling in the upstairs room using loud, heavy footsteps. Thack, 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 thack. I was thinking that since no one goes upstairs, where is this sound coming from? I told everyone in my house about it the next morning, but no one paid attention. Hearing this, I began to believe that something similar had occurred, and I went back to sleep in my room that night. Around 2:30 a.m., I felt as if someone had climbed onto my bed. I opened my eyes and looked around, but no one was there. I then realized it was a dream and fell back asleep. A few days later, some of my relatives visited us for the holidays. They also had 2 children the same age as me. After dinner, all of the kids came to my room and began scaring each other by telling ghost witch stories. One of them, Archie, declared that he was not afraid of ghosts and began boasting in this manner. Dean, Archie's elder brother, stated that if he was not afraid, he would go alone into another room where a smaller light bulb was torching. Archie said, "What's the big deal about this? I'm going now." Archie went to that room and then ran out of it very quickly. We saw him walk out. We burst out laughing and began making fun of him. Then, Archie began to cry and became completely drenched in sweat. I was so puzzled by everything that I asked him what had happened. He trembled and said, "I saw a man there who was wrapped in a black blanket, and he was leaning as he walked." Telling this, he started crying louder, but I managed to calm him down and get everyone back into the game. After a while of playing, everyone fell asleep. But everything that happened to me and Archie was going through my head. I went to the balcony to think about all of this. When I looked down, I saw the same man that Archie had told me about. He was slowly approaching our car, and then, as he got close, he suddenly disappeared. After this incident, I became scared and began sleeping with my father. For a few days, everything was fine. I didn't hear any footsteps and never saw that man again. I assumed everything was fine, but I was mistaken, because such incidents began to occur with my elder brother, Jackson. This was Nicole's story. Let us now hear what happened to Jackson. He described the incidents that occurred to him in this manner. My family members slept inside the room, while I slept on the couch outside in the hall. I couldn't sleep despite my best efforts, so I started walking around the house like this. While walking, my gaze was drawn to the main gate, and I had the impression that someone was standing outside it. I went to the gate to look, but no one was there, so I went back to sleep. The next day, around 3 p.m., I went to the second floor for some work. As I was walking, I felt like someone was following me. I looked back 2 or 3 times, but no one was there. I heard something falling from behind as I was going downstairs. I looked back and saw a black shadow on the wall in front of me, and she vanished as soon as I saw it. I jumped in terror and sprinted downstairs. I spent the following night sleeping in the hallway. In the middle of the night, my eyes opened unexpectedly, and seeing what was in front of me, my condition had reached a point where nothing was coming out of my mouth. I tried to scream, but couldn't even if I wanted to. Her face was so horrifying that anyone with a weak heart would die just by looking at her. Her tattered black clothes and hair were slowly flying through the air, and she was about a foot above the ground and staring at me. I began to read my prayers in my head, but my prayers had no effect on it. She stared at me for 2 or 3 minutes, then went up the stairs, and I had no idea when I fainted. The next morning, I woke up and immediately rushed to tell my mother everything that had happened. Nicole also arrived and stated that there is something wrong in this house, and I also saw a man dressed in black and heard someone walking in the night. After hearing this, Mother was convinced that if both of them are saying this, then something is seriously wrong. The next day, the mother called a priest from the church and told him everything and asked him to purify the house, which the priest did by going around the entire house and purifying it with holy water. While I was sleeping that night, someone picked me up from the sofa and slammed me on the ground so hard that I broke my straight arm. To the sound of my screams, my entire family woke and began asking what had happened. Someone slammed me down hard and broke my arm. I cried. All of the family members were terrified after witnessing this. And the next day, we went to our uncle's house and told them everything. He said, "You stay here for a few days, and we'll figure out what to do after that." The first 2 days went well, but on the third day, something happened that I can't believe could ever happen. This was Jackson's claim. Let's hear what happened on the third day, which was hard to believe and told by Nicole and Jackson's mother in this manner. There was no one at the house on the third day, as I sat on the sofa watching TV. I felt as if someone was sitting by my side while watching TV, and when I looked to the side, my senses were blown away. A man and a woman dressed in black sat beside me. I couldn't move or speak, and both of them were frighteningly smiling at me. Then they both got up and went to the kitchen, not knowing where they were going from there. When my husband came back home from work that night, I told him everything, and we all became upset once more that such incidents occur here as well. Everyone else had slept through the night, but I couldn't. I began to worry more about the children than myself, that they should never see anything like this again. When I woke up at 1:00 a.m., I smelled gas and suspected that it was leaking. I went to the kitchen to investigate. Everything looked normal when I arrived, but as I turned to head back to my room, I heard a voice call out to me from behind. I turned the phone back and saw that no one was there. I dashed to my room because I hadn't gotten any sleep that night. The next morning, I told my husband, "We should do something. What is going on?" He stated that I would be going home today with a priest. Mr. Williams invited a learned priest to his home, and he related everything that happened up to this point. After arriving at his residence, the priest stepped inside one of the rooms to check on something. After looking around the entire house, the priest concluded that there are 2 different kinds of demonic powers living here. Husband and wife, and the soul of a small child wonders who died in this place many years ago. But my concern is that 2 demonic powers, only they can harm your family. There is nothing to be afraid of others. When I heard this, I was terrified and asked the priest to help me solve the problem. The priest stated, "I will come after I finish my special worship. Until then, I will give an amulet to your family. This amulet will guard your loved ones from harm. Those souls will be visible to you, but they will not be able to harm you." The priest told me that in order to combat these evil spirits, I will need to make some necessary preparations. I returned to my family, gave the amulets to everyone, and told my wife everything the priest said. After a few days, the priest had finished his special worship, and I took him back to my place once more. The priest retrieved a small pitcher. He started a fire and put something strange in it, and a strange smell spread throughout the house. He then sat down on the ground and took 5 lemons. After reciting the mantra, he continued to place each lemon in a bag in turn. Every time the priest uttered the mantra, those of us there began to feel a peculiar restlessness, and our bodies felt heavy. The priest declared that there is no longer any cause for concern when he had finished placing all of the lemons in the bag. Put these lemons in a location where they can't be reached by anyone. Then he left. Then I threw those lemons in a nearby canal and went home. As the filth subsided, the atmosphere of the house became lighter, and it appeared as if there was so much peace in the house. That evening, I called my family. Nothing like this has ever happened in the house since that day. Here is the strange thing that happened to Mr. Williams' family. I had to document a number of similar incidents that occurred with various people in various locations. Stay tuned with me.
It has been many months since we left. After weeks of torture and fright, we finally decided enough was enough. We packed up our things and left. Most wouldn't understand or even begin to comprehend why a young couple lacking in any kind of wealth would choose to move out of any kind of previous accommodation. But they didn't know the truth that lies within that wretched place. It all began right on the first week of us moving in. We had just finished our degrees at university, and we were searching for somewhere close by where our new jobs were to call home. It didn't take long before we came across a house far under the normal market price, so without thinking, we bought it without even looking around. The owners were already gone by the time we had arrived, so we got straight onto moving our furniture in. Without much to our name, as of yet, we moved everything in within just 2 days, and on the third, we can now call it home. We were so excited to finally have a home, and that night we went to bed brimming with excitement and energy. That's when I started seeing it. That very same night, I had woken up in what seemed to be the middle of the night. It was pitch black outside, and it wasn't that state of waking up where you can simply get up, go to the toilet, maybe just roll over to find a better sleeping position. No, this was something different. My entire body still seemed to be sleeping, and even though my eyes were fully open, I couldn't even move my face. Although I was mildly shocked by this lack of movement, I didn't necessarily feel terrified or scared. That was until I felt something watching me. Suddenly, I felt extremely uneasy, and I tried to call out to Jack, my boyfriend, but my lips stayed shut. Without much point in trying to get up or wake Jack, I managed to close my eyes, and with everything I had, drifted back to sleep. The next morning, we both still felt that rush of excitement from all the moving in, and we just sat up in bed to read for a while before breakfast. As I reached for my book, which was usually located on my bedside table directly next to me, I was surprised to see it had fallen to the floor. I could barely remember the night before, as if it were a dream, so perhaps I knocked it over in my sleep, I thought, while I picked it up from the floor. After about 20 minutes, we both felt our stomachs roaring to be fed, so we got out of bed, popped our slippers on, and headed down the stairs to the kitchen. The kitchen was mostly colored white and black, an attempt at a modern style, but the walls bore cracks and the cupboards all bent slightly off their hinges, clinging to the bearings to stay upright. Over at the sink, several patches of rust and dark stains engulfed the once gleaming metal. As disgusting as it was practically the same filth we were previously living in at our shared dorm rooms, so we didn't care and went to grab some cereal. The rest of the day felt normal after that. We finished breakfast, went to our jobs, came back, and got ready for dinner. Instantaneously, we noticed that rusty, stained sink was now completely spotless. Looking at each other with strained eyebrows, confused by its sudden cleanliness, we nervously walked over to continue washing our hands. The water rumbled in the pipes as it struggled to make its way to our waiting hands. By the time it burst out, we jolted back to see the water was brown and seemed to contain specks of muck and filth within it. Jack hastily turned the tap off and pulled the plug, hoping to drain the sewage-like liquid. As it sunk into the drain, we stared at each other, mouths wide open in disgust. Later that evening, other strange occurrences started happening around the house too. Objects were falling off the shelves regardless of the fact that all the windows were closed, so no gust of wind or drafts could be flowing through the house. The excitement still held on. We were still living in a house, bought below market price, and we could hire a plumber to deal with that rotten pipework connected to the sink. We laid there in bed, staring at the ceiling, preparing ourselves for slumber after a long day of work. After a while, I could start to hear Jack's mumbled snoring, which I giggled at before falling asleep myself.
Hungry.
My eyelids split open after hearing a raspy voice whispering hungry almost straight into my ear. Horrified by this unnatural noise, I tried to sit up and look around, but my body was once again motionless. This time, however, my head was positioned toward the corner of the room. As my eyes returned back to focus, I spotted a mortifying figure huddled over in the corner, back to the wall, facing me, grinning. I froze in fear. My body started shaking uncontrollably from the horror of what lay before me, but I still had no control over it to escape or warn Jack. Even trying to scream wouldn't work. All that came out was a hushed murmur as that thing kept grinning at me. I couldn't make out its face either. Its dark form meant only the very highlights of its foul jaws could be seen in the darkness. I was petrified. Hours later, still staring into that grinning nightmare, the sun had finally begun to rise and my eyes were able to rest, even just for a few hours. In the morning, I looked over to see Jack, still asleep, drooling onto his pillow. A faint smile spread across my face before I remembered the night before, exactly like last time. It felt like a dream, a state of total futility and dreadful fear. I shook Jack awake and blurted out everything I could remember, drenching the sheets with tears. I couldn't have been more scared. He took it more or less seriously enough and told me,
Don't worry, I'll stay awake tonight, okay? Then if that thing comes again, I'll deal with it. Sound good?
I nodded slightly, still dripping from the tears, and we once again got up to go downstairs for breakfast. As we walked into the kitchen that morning, I stopped in the doorway as I saw the book that should have been on my bedside table, which was now perched on top of the dining table. Not only was my book now moving on its own in the night, but that also wasn't all either. That sink we saw yesterday evening, which was spotless, well, it was covered in rust and dark stains again. Terror was beginning to set in. We decided it was time to do something about what was going on around the house. So, for the rest of the day, we prepared a camera directly at the sink and bought several cans of coffee so Jack would be able to stay awake that night. The smell of caffeine engulfed my nostrils as we headed back inside after returning from the shops. I longed for it, but we knew I needed to sleep to get through this. All that remained now was to wait for night to fall and that thing to return. We sat in bed for the next few hours and talked while Jack comforted me. He told me it would be alright, but as soon as we saw the sun dip below the horizon and the moon rise into the sky, we knew it was time. We climbed under the duvet, ready for the night ahead. At least that was what we thought. The hours clocked by one, and soon enough, I had fallen into a deep sleep. Jack sat awake, sipping coffee, and kept looking out the corner that I had told him about the previous night. For hours, the house laid still and silent, almost cautious to not disturb my slumber. Then, all of a sudden, it started.
Hungry.
Just as I had done the previous 2 nights, my eyes shot open. Everything was completely void of all light. That was aside from one particularly visible patch of light on the ceiling. As my pupils darted around the room, I strained to tell Jack that it was happening. I needed him. A vast wave of relief washed over me as I felt him moving about on the other side of the bed. I was safe. Just then noticed something in the corner of the ceiling where that dim patch of light sat. There, latched onto the ceiling, was a figure of no human form, grinning down at me, its teeth sharp and twisted. The utter terror and fear gripped me and forced me into shock. My body immediately started violently shaking. My mouth foamed all while I had to lay there and watch as the figure crept towards me. On its way, it knocked over my book that I had once again put on the bedside table to read in the morning. I took my eyes off of it for just that second and it had vanished. A stroke of luck, it would seem. The noise of the book colliding with the floor also had alerted Jack next to me. I felt him crawl over and lean next to my face. It confused me a bit, until I heard it whisper, there, grinning at me, was that awful figure observing me in my struggle with such sadistic joy that my seizure stopped. And then I felt it. I burst out of bed as soon as I woke up. Jack had seen me having a seizure during the night and tried waking me up. It did nothing for a while, but eventually I came to. We dialed for an ambulance that came just minutes later. I was completely pale and barely able to walk when it arrived, and the paramedics said I was still massively in shock, and I needed to rest before they could check me over for injuries or diagnose what had happened to me. A few hours later at the hospital, after I had finally calmed down, Jack came in with several doctors who were ready to run tests on me and have me looked at. The results were returned quickly and showed I had been in a state called sleep paralysis, which was also the reason for the seizure, which was due to the shock of the things I could see while stuck in that paralyzed state. The results seemed acceptable, but when I asked why I could hear it talking, their faces dropped. They told me under strained breath that it was extremely rare for there to be any speech while in sleep paralysis, regardless of who it was from. I sat there and contemplated this. Then I told them it had been knocking over my book. Disbelief fell upon all their faces, and they decided to check me for any psychological problems, but none were found. They discussed it for a while, but simply couldn't come to any final conclusion, and so told me to take some antidepressants, and that was that. On the way home, me and Jack sat there, bewildered by the lack of acknowledgement of what had happened just last night. When we arrived home, we decided to check the camera that had been watching the sink, but we found out that it had run out of battery before the night even started. Jack said it was fully charged when he set it up. Peculiar as it was, we left it. Even to this day, even in this new house, even in this new bed, that figure still haunts my every waking moment. The day we moved felt ominous, as if the thing was following us, but only distant memories held it in my mind. But one day, that thing will return, and God bless those who chooses it as its next victim.
Narrated by Dorsey Jackson of Dorsey Jackson Global at Compound City. Be sure to like and subscribe.